Henry is the witness to many tales of his neighborhood. As he walks on the streets in the dark, the loneliness of some and the broken, toxic relationship of others doesn't remain hidden from him. After saying hello to a furry friend and taking a skinny dip in the nearby bayou, his detour for the night comes to an end. He soon returns home to his mother, Talia, sleeping on the couch. Talia has been drinking again. Henry takes the glass from under her hand and places it on the table. He then puts a blanket on his mom. Paints, varnish, brushes, many such supplies, and stacks of books and sketchbooks make Henry's room his. He goes to bed shirtless. Probably his rare skin disease makes it uncomfortable for him to have a cloth constantly rubbing against his damaged skin. The disease has left many burn scars on his body. He closes his eyes and soon falls asleep. It is morning, and they have a visitor. A man, Carl, with whom Talia flirts. Soon Henry comes out of his bedroom, and the man says hi to him. He then turns to Talia and makes an inappropriate comment about Henry's condition, calling him a vampire who only comes out at night. Talia doesn't acknowledge it and reminds Carl he wouldn't want to be late for work. After sending him off, Talia enters the living room and hands Henry a new bundle of paintbrushes. She says she wants her talented baby to have all the things he can paint the world with. Henry thanks her for the gift. She asks him how his work was last night, and he replies it was fine. Talia and Henry are open about their lives and what is happening in it. So when Talia tells Henry that Mrs. Martin is going to visit that night, Henry isn't surprised, though he thought Mrs. Martin wasn't going to show up again. His mother claims Mrs. Martin wasn't ready before. She asserts, being a tarot card reader, she knows what people need. Henry doesn't bother questioning her anymore. He scratches his arm, and a blood mark appears on his shirt. Talia notices it and says she'll put a new shirt on his bed. That night Henry sits in the Peaches restaurant reading a book. Melinda, the waitress at Peaches, is happy to see Henry. She jokes about being fed up with her husband, Arnie, and jokingly says she might have to move in with Henry's mother. Henry chuckles and says she might want to rethink that decision. The owner of the restaurant comes with Henry's order and asks Melinda to work instead of indulging in chit-chat. Gina, another waitress, enters the restaurant. She is a little late for her shift. Gina has a huge bruise on her face. Henry had seen what had happened between her and her husband the other night when he was out strolling. Henry sits in Arthur's garage, reading. Arthur keeps him company, and they discuss poetry, and how it is like jazz. Arthur offers Henry his beer over their discussion, and Henry gladly accepts it. Arthur starts working on the car for repair and hurts his finger. Henry gets up and passes him a towel to wrap around his finger. Someone rings the doorbell, and Henry offers to attend to the customer. It is Magnus. Henry politely asks him to put off his cigarette. Once he does, he asks for 2 gallons of gas. Arthur comes out and says he'll take care of it. Magnus condescendingly comments on how their life must be boring here. Every night they are here, with no TV or women. If it were him, he would have ended himself. Arthur takes a jibe at him and says that would have been a blessing from above. Before Magnus can start a fight, Arthur puts the cans on the back of his truck. Magnus pays for the gas and passes a lewd comment. Arthur jokes about what Magnus just said and lightens the mood. They both laugh and walk inside. After work, Henry paints a little before sleeping. That night in his dream, he is taken back to the day of his accident. He sees glimpses of what had happened. He wakes up with a jerk and realizes it was just a dream. He pants and lies back down. The next night at Arthur's garage, Allison comes with smoke coming out of her car. Henry comes out and says it doesn't look good. Allison says the engine is overheated. She asks for a water hose and grabs it before Henry can help her. He suggests she shouldn't drive the car if she has to travel long distances. Ignoring his suggestion, Allison asks what she owes him. Henry smiles and says it is just water. He wishes her a safe drive, and Allison drives off. But not too far away, her engine starts spluttering. And soon, the car stops. She tries to start it, but the engine gives in. She smacks the wheel with her fists out of frustration. In the morning, some kids peek through the car's window as Allison sleeps. She suddenly wakes up scared, seeing unknown faces over her head. The kids get scared too, and run away, seeing her awake. She takes the car back to Arthur's garage. Arthur inspects the car and says it is going to take a while as the car is in pretty bad shape. Allison is eager to leave and confesses the car is her home and she doesn't have any money to give to him for the repairs. Arthur looks at her and then says that Peach's restaurant is looking for a worker, so she should go down there and ask for Melinda and tell her Arthur sent her. He assures her by the time she is back, he'll get the car running. Allison agrees and goes to the restaurant. Melinda makes her fill out a form, and Allison only manages to write her name. She doesn't have an address or a phone number. Allison assures Melinda she can do anything they require, from cleaning the dishes to cooking. Melinda tells her they are having a problem with one of the waitresses not showing up, so Allison will be working as a waitress on the night shift. Henry is right on time for his dinner at Peach's. Melinda fills him with a cup of coffee and with the latest updates on what a new girl is doing there instead of Gina. Jack, the restaurant owner, got fed up with Gina for missing her 3rd shift this week and decided to hire a new girl. Jack calls Melinda from the kitchen as the order is ready, making Allison jump. Melinda asks her if she is fine, and Allison manages to smile. Henry says hi to Allison and tells her that the parts to fix her car will be there soon. Allison isn't very talkative and tries to brush him off. Henry offers to take a look at her car in the meantime, but Allison says no, almost yelling. She says she appreciates the offer, but it is fine. Chatty Melinda does what she is the best at, chatting. She lets Allison know how punctual Henry is and then adds that he has a skin disease where he can't go out in the sunlight. She genuinely feels bad for Henry as he hasn't seen the sun since he was a little boy. Allison looks at Henry, who is now reading his poetry book. Henry is back at the garage and is reading about Jelly Roll Morton, who started playing piano in a brothel. While fixing a car, Arthur speaks about how one learns and then remarks that Morton must have found inspiration between those walls. He then turns towards Henry and says every man needs a sweet inspiration. With a smirk on his face, Henry asks Arthur if he's suggesting he go to a brothel. Arthur laughs and says he didn't say anything like that. He worries that Henry spends all his time being stuck with an old man like him. Henry says the same can be said about him. For Arthur, being in the shop is an escape from the loneliness that Martha had left when she was gone. But he reminds Henry that he doesn't have an excuse to spend his time there. He sits with Henry and says that a man has to learn to break free from the chains of fear that binds him. It doesn't matter if one is scared to death to do it. One must do what he has to do. They drink to the philosophy of life. Suddenly, Arthur gets up from his chair and asks Henry to paint the walls of the garage with his imagination. Henry walks to stand beside Arthur and asks what he has in mind. Arthur envisions a tropical island with palm trees and a nice beach and him lying on the beach, being served an ice-cold beer by a pretty lady. Henry teases Arthur, saying he thought he had retired, but Arthur defends himself, saying he retired only for a while. They laugh and celebrate the bond between them. Henry is done for the night. As he walks out, he sees Allison sleeping in her car. The next morning, he gets up to see Janice and his mother sitting at the table. He asks if Ms. Nelson still has a room to rent. His mother, instead of answering, questions him if he's going somewhere. Henry says it is for a friend. His mother gets a bit confrontational and asks what friend. Henry doesn't want to argue and starts to walk away when Janice says it is still out for rent. Henry thanks her and leaves. Henry comes to the restaurant for his meal and meets with Allison, who is cleaning the tables. He says she will be fine for the fall sleeping in her car, but in winter, she'll freeze. He hands her the name and address of the room available for rent. Allison says she doesn't plan on being there for that long but takes note of his insistence. He adds that Ms. Nelson doesn't hear that well, so she might need to speak up. She thanks him and gets back to work. She visits Ms. Nelson and takes the room on rent. Once she is shown to her room, she locks the door and pulls the blinds on the windows. Once sure that nobody can see her, she empties her bag, which has a large block of illegal substance wrapped in a towel along with other things. She wraps it back in the towel and hides it under the mattress. She holds back a sniffle as she ponders over how things turned out to be for her. The other night, Henry stands behind the bushes at night and stares at Allison sitting on her balcony, lost in her thoughts. He has taken a fancy to her. At the diner, he tries to start a conversation and asks if she has a family back in Florida. She seems shocked and asks Henry who told him she was from Florida. Henry says her license plate has the state number. Henry introduces himself but is met with a cold response. Allison says she appreciates he found a room for her, but she is not really looking for friends at that moment. She adds she has nothing personal against him. Henry and Arthur are sharing a laugh at Arthur's childhood stories. He tells him how he didn't have many choices because of the society they were living in and then says the same about Henry, that he too spends life like he doesn't have a choice. Arthur's case was different, but he motivates Henry not to hold himself back because nobody but he himself is constricting his progress. He reminds Henry that he has got his whole life ahead. He ought to step out there and take what is his. Henry understands what Arthur is trying to say. Allison always stays on her toes. Holding that much substance has made her paranoid, and she feels it is not safe to keep it hidden in the room. She packs it up in a plastic bag and puts it in her bag before heading out. She heads to the woods and finds a shallow pit. She stashes the substance there and makes sure it is covered with enough leaves and dirt. Once done, she comes out of the woods and gets startled hearing Henry's voice. He says it is not safe to come out in the woods alone at night. Allison counters that he is here too, but Henry explains people tend to leave him alone. Allison apologizes for what she said at the diner. Henry says it is okay. She asks him why he is being so nice to her, and he shrugs. She continues questioning, asking if he doesn't sleep. Henry asks her the same question, and she says it is too hot for her to sleep as Ms. Nelson doesn't use fans because of the noise they create. Henry offers to walk her. As they pass several houses, he tells her the stories of each one of them. He then whistles to call his furry friend Benny. After giving him a treat, they continue walking and soon reach Henry's home. He asks her if she likes fairs. Every year the whole town puts on a fair behind the old cider mill. It isn't much but shares that Melinda will be defending her apple bobbing title. She's been the winner for 4 years consecutively as she trains for it. Allison smiles upon hearing this. Henry further tells her that Jack shuts down the diner for the night so everyone can go, and asks if she'd like to come. She says yes and then changes her answer to maybe. With that, she heads back to her place, and Henry goes inside his house. Henry's mom sees him talking to Allison from the window. She's waiting for him on the couch when he enters the house. She asks him to sit with her. She places a deck of tarot on the sofa, and Henry chooses one. It is the Fool. Talia explains the Fool represents the beginning of a new cycle. The second card she pulls is High Priestess, who speaks of hidden influences, usually that of a woman. Henry knows where this is going. Talia asks him to tell her what is going on. But Henry doesn't bother. She asks him to tell her that he loves her, and Henry says it is late. He leaves before wishing her goodnight. Henry and Allison are trying their luck at the shooting game. Henry doesn't do well, but Allison hits all 3 shots in the bullseye. Henry laughs in amazement and says he'll always remember to be on her good side. She tells him her brother taught her how to shoot. She picks a bear as her gift. Melinda wins the apple bobbing game again. Henry and Allison continue walking to all the other stalls. They are trying another game when Magnus and his friends start passing lewd and rude comments on Henry. But Henry ignores the comments. It doesn't go unnoticed by Allison. They move to another stall. Magnus's friend instigates him, saying Henry is ignoring him. Magnus takes the bait and walks towards Henry, calling out to him. He grabs Henry by the collar and punches him. Allison pushes Magnus back and yells at him. But Henry just walks away from there. Allison is enraged by what just happened and says Henry should do something about it. Henry says he can fight his own battles. He doesn't need her help. Allison retorts she doesn't consider him walking away from this to be fighting. Henry sits on his couch in the dark, deep in thought. His mother is drinking again. She says the drinks are going to drive her crazy someday. She feels like she has the whole town's worries inside her head. Talia casually mentions that she heard he was at the fair with Allison, and explains she is just looking out for him. When Henry calls out to her for having spies all around the town, she notices his face and turns on the light. His face is bruised from the impact. She asks who did this to him and forcefully holds his face up. He tries to smack her hand away, but she is adamant. She pours herself another drink and says she'll find out who did it to him because she is the eyes and ears of this town. Henry speaks up for himself and says, even so, nothing has ever stopped. Henry and Allison have started to develop an affinity towards each other, much to Henry's mother's chagrin. Henry takes Allison for a skinny dip at the bayou. After they put on their clothes, Allison asks if Henry misses the sunlight. He says he has gotten used to the night, the quietness, and the rhythm of it. Sometimes he feels like the night belongs to him. He can sit near his window during the day or go outside if he stays undercover. But he always feels like he's hiding and believes everybody is hiding from something. He shares how people called him names like a vampire and said he slept in a coffin. Allison thinks people are cruel, but Henry thinks they are scared. That is why he was homeschooled, as his mom thought that was the best for him. Allison assures him he didn't miss much. But Henry enumerates a list of pop quizzes, school parties, and Halloween that he missed out on. Allison is surprised to hear he missed Halloween, and Henry says he had the best costume ever, referring to his scarred skin. Allison gets up and asks him to come with her. They dress up and knock on Mrs. Kohler's house first. Allison explains they are trick-or-treating and trying to make up for all the times Henry missed the Halloween party. They go around the neighborhood and get many things as treats. After they are done, Allison comes back to Henry's place. They're sitting in his room, and Allison admires the painting he has done on the wall. She asks him about his scar. Henry doesn't remember much, but he remembers how his skin smelled when it burned under the sun. He isn't sure, but Talia had left him with his dad, who used to drink a lot. He didn't hear him until it was too late. He took off not long after the incident. Henry continues that the weirdest thing is that, for a few moments, the sun felt good on his skin, warming him inside out. He felt like he was alive. Allison lies close to Henry and lightly touches his scar. She then leans in and kisses him before cuddling with him. The two have fallen asleep. Allison wakes up early in the morning and gets ready to leave. As she is about to open the door, Talia gives her a summer first impression, and they exchange their names. She asks Allison to sit with her. She calls herself a dreamer and tells her how she sees things vividly in her dreams. She pours Allison and herself some liquor and asks her if she can see her palm. On the pretext of reading her palm, she makes a remark to let Allison know that she despises her for getting close to her son. Allison says she should go, but Talia stops her and says her lifeline indicates something or someone made her life very difficult. Allison has had enough, and she bids goodbye to Talia. That night when Henry comes, Melinda is surprised when he orders waffles. He smiles at Allison, who smiles back. He tries to ask what Talia said to her, but she says not much. At the garage, Allison helps Arthur with the car, and Arthur declares her to be a better mechanic than Henry, who is busy painting the walls. Arthur tries to ask Allison why a young woman like herself is traveling alone, but she doesn't reveal her story. Back in Henry's room, he is working on another wall and has painted the ocean. Allison praises his work as she is reminded of her childhood when her mother used to pack their things and drive all night long for her, and her brother to wake up to the smell of the ocean. and the sun shining on their faces. She realizes she shouldn't have said that and apologizes. Henry doesn't mind and says it seems nice. She walks closer to him and asks him to close his eyes. She shines the lamp close to his face to mimic sunlight, which brings a smile to Henry's face. He says he'd like to see it one day. Allison looks at him and wonders what she can do for the innocent man standing in front of her. The next thing we know, she drives him the entire night, and just before sunrise, they reach the beach. He had dozed off, so she lightly touches him and wakes him up. He looks around and realizes he is at a beach. Allison walks on the beach as Henry sees her from the car. He wears a blanket over himself to avoid exposure to the sun. He calls out to her to get in the water, and she does. He is the happiest he's ever been. Back at home, Talia comes to check on Henry but is surprised not to find him in his bedroom. She then visits Peaches and meets Melinda. Melinda is happy to see Talia and asks her what brings her here. Talia says she wanted to see the place where Henry spends most of his time. But in reality, she's there to get information on Allison. Melinda, being a package of information, tells her that Allison called and told her they are at the ocean. Melinda doesn't stop there and says it's good Henry is getting out there, and who knows, probably they'll move out of the town. Talia smiles, suppressing her anger, and soon leaves the restaurant. She is back home, worrying herself sick. Carl asks her what happened. Talia is angry that it has been 24 hours, and Henry doesn't have the courtesy to call his mother. Carl makes jokes about Henry hiding in a cave, which irks Talia. But when he makes a remark about Allison and Henry being together, that is it for Talia, and she doesn't flinch before hitting him across the face. Carl looks at her in shock and then calls her names before leaving. At night, Henry and Allison lie on the beach. Henry suggests they keep moving and find a place near the sea to stay. He can get a job working on cars, or she can probably do it. Allison says he can read poetry while she works. They laugh and enjoy being there. Allison appreciates the freedom as, after a long time, she truly felt like that. They share a romantic moment, but before they can escalate, Allison pushes Henry away. Henry asks if he did something wrong, and Allison says it has nothing to do with him. She stares at him before speaking again that not everybody is good like Henry. She unbuttons her shirt and shows him the cigarette burn marks and needle marks on both her arms. Exposing herself and the scars for the first time to someone she loves makes her overwhelmed, and Henry hugs her. He wants her to know that he is with her no matter what. She cries in his arms, letting all her suppressed emotions out. They soon reach back home. Allison drops Henry off at his house. As soon as he enters his home, Talia starts bashing him for having gone for 2 days. She tries to make him feel guilty by reminding him how she has protected him from the evils of this world. When she doesn't stop criticizing Allison, he yells at her to stop it and walks into his room. Magnus and Carl come to the diner one evening while Henry eats his dinner. They haven't changed and are as obnoxious as ever. But this time, Henry speaks his mind and insults them, in such a way that their thick heads don't get a thing, until Allison simplifies it for them. She then pours coffee on Carl, and he says she is going to regret this. Melinda steps in and warns them that they don't want to face Jack's wrath. The two soon leave. A skinny dip at the bayou has become a usual exercise. Allison appreciates the new Henry, who can stand up for himself. Henry says it is because he has her in his life now. She thinks something and says that night she'll be going home. She knows Talia doesn't like her, and giving her a break would be nice. She also refuses to be walked home by Henry. She assures him she'll be fine, and they share a kiss before she leaves. Allison looks bright and happy when she walks back home. Henry has a whole wall dedicated to Allison in the form of her portrait. The days are fun for Allison and Henry when they are together. It is a whole new world devoid of their past worries. One evening, Arthas plays the saxophone and Allison and Henry dance to the tune. The doorbell rings, and Allison offers to get it for them. But blood drains from her face when she sees a man she recognizes. The man in the car hasn't seen her, so Allison quickly makes her way in and says she drank too much and goes to the toilet. Arthur asks Henry to say they're out of gas to the customer waiting outside. Henry goes out and says the same to the man. The man asks him where he is, and Henry replies Battle Creek. He asks the man where he's going, and the man says he doesn't know yet. He says he's actually looking for a friend of his. The man asks if he can use the toilet, but Henry stops him and says it is out of order. He suggests the man go to the bar at the end of the town if he's passing through. The man says thanks and drives away. Henry hurries inside and calls out to Allison. But she is gone. Henry goes to her place and finds her packing her things. He sees a whole packet of illegal substances and confronts her. She says she can pretend it is the past, but it has never really left her. It's always here. Henry refuses to believe her and says this is not who she is. Allison explains that she was into these things so deep that she never thought she'd make it out alive. She wanted a way out. She apologizes and says she never wanted to involve Henry in her battles. Henry, now almost crying, tries to stop her. He asks who the guy is, but Allison doesn't tell him anything. He asks her if she is going to run. Allison has made up her mind, and she can't stay there forever. She gets in her car and drives off, leaving Henry pleading and crying. Talia visits the bar and orders her usual drink. She's searching for a lighter when the man, who was looking for Allison, helps her light her cigarette. He is fascinated by her name. She asks him what brings him to their sleepy town, and he discloses he's looking for someone who took something that doesn't belong to her. Talia guesses who he's looking for, but before telling him anything, they flirt, and he introduces himself as Sai. Allison cries as she drives away from the town. She tries to find a lighter in her bag but pulls out the seashell she collected at the beach. She looks at it, and all the fond memories come back to her. She cannot leave Henry, and so she takes a U-turn and drives back to the town. Arthur is cleaning when Henry comes back to the garage. He asks Arthur why everybody lies. Arthur tries to explain that sometimes people lie to protect others. Henry says he doesn't need the protection or treatment that he gets when people consider him as someone who is on the verge of breaking. He affirms what Arthur said once, that if he needs the truth, he must seek it. He asks Arthur to tell him the truth. Arthur agrees and asks him to sit. He has something to show him. Arthur brings some pictures of Henry's dad with Henry. Arthur never had the heart to get rid of them, but he didn't know if Henry would ever want to see his dad, so he kept the photographs with him. Arthur tells him that Henry's father was weak as things were too much for him to handle, his mama being one. Henry's mother had cheated on his father too many times, and one day he just got up and left. Arthur says it wasn't right of him to walk out on his family or on Henry. It is then Henry realizes his father had left before his accident. Henry cries at this revelation. Arthur says he has told him the truth, but he won't come between Henry and his mama, so Henry needs to talk to her. Talia wakes after sleeping with Sai. She wakes him up and asks him to leave. Sai is not like the other men she has had affairs with. He is adamant and doesn't like to be pushed around. Sai wanders into Henry's room and sees Allison's portrait. Talia follows him, and seeing him the portrait gives him Allison's location. Allison reaches the diner and asks Melinda if Henry is there. Melinda says he didn't show up. Allison quickly leaves to find him. As she runs out, she stands face to face with Sai, who rushes towards her. Talia is again drinking when Henry comes in. He says they never talk, so he proposes they have a chat. Henry asks her about the day of the accident. Talia tries to show Henry that his father couldn't stand him, but she stayed. She could have gone too, but she stayed for his sake. Henry has had enough of beating around the bush, and he yells at her, asking her to say that she was so drunk that she let Henry go out, which resulted in the scars he carries to date. Talia says it was an accident. She adds that Henry had wandered out there, and then he started screaming. Talia cries as she remembers that day. She says she tried, but Henry remains unfazed and says she didn't try. He controls his anger till he is in his room. Once there, he locks the room and starts throwing and smashing all his things. He even splashes black paint on Allison's portrait and then cries his heart out. Sai has kidnapped Allison. He takes her to the woods. Allison lies on the back of his truck, her hands, feet, and mouth tied. He removes the rope from her mouth, and she begs him to let her go now that he has got what he wanted. But Sai wouldn't let go of her so easily, as he has been dreaming of this since the day she left. Here we come to know that Sai is Allison's abusive boyfriend. He scares her with a burning cigarette, and she cries. He warns her that he is going to make her beg him. Allison spits at him. Sai gets excited because he likes when she puts up a fight. He forces himself on her, but she manages to break free her hand and takes out a wrench she had in her pocket. She attacks Sai with it and then repeats it many times, taking out all her rage for all the times he had hurt her. She gasps for air after the adrenaline rush. Henry has packed his bag and is leaving. Talia says he can't leave her. She feels remorse for lying and promises to spend her life making it up to him. Henry says this isn't about her. He should have left a long time ago, and she should have pushed him to do the same, but she didn't. Henry claims that she wanted him to stay and rot in the house. She sobs as Henry leaves. Allison has wrapped his body in a cloth. She searches for the substance and finds it under his seat. She then puts it inside the cloth with his body and tightens the rope around him. She then drags the corpse. Henry goes to the bayou and jumps in it to cool off his anger. After dragging the corpse near the waters in the midst of the woods, she pushes it inside the water and drowns the body. She then goes to Henry's house to find him but gets scared looking at her destroyed portrait. Talia sneers at her and blames her for everything. Allison doesn't say anything and leaves in a rush. It is morning, and Henry had fallen asleep while floating in the water. He wakes up and sees Allison overhead. She leans closer to him and apologizes. Henry says he doesn't want to hide anymore, and Allison believes him. She assures him he doesn't have to. She takes out her jacket and wraps it around Henry to protect him from the sun. Still embracing him, she assures him everything is going to be okay. He sits in her car, and they look at each other and smile. Henry's eyes well up, as he is finally free from all the chains he had been tied down with for his entire life journey. He was now with the love of his life to embark on a new journey. And Allison, too, is leaving her monsters behind and looking at a bright future with a guy who truly loves her. As they drive through the town, it is Henry's first time looking at it in the daylight. The town holds a different energy which amazes Henry. He has left a book of poetry by Robert Frost for Arthur. Arthur looks around and then goes inside to see the painting. Henry has painted a window for Arthur from which he can see the beach and palm trees. He understands his friend and companion has finally taken a step to do what he got to do, and he couldn't have been prouder. Talia sits in Henry's room, looking at his paintings, lost in her own world, while Henry sits beside Allison, not afraid of the sun anymore. They leave the town to start a new chapter in their lives together.